Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating, the high-tech, eye-in-the-sky world of satellite oversight. You know, for decades, whenever a massive piece of infrastructure was built, the government that built it entirely controlled the narrative. They controlled the data, they controlled the inspections, the structural reports, the whole shebang. But what happens when literally anyone with an internet connection can suddenly look down from space? Well, today, we're focusing our lens on the colossal Three Gorges Dam in China and how a totally new era of democratized Earth observation is fundamentally changing what we know about it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 2020, social media absolutely exploded with panic. I mean, images began circulating like wildfire online that seemed to show the massive Three Gorges Dam visibly bending, warping, and basically buckling under the pressure of severe floods. And honestly, the images were terrifying, right? Especially when you consider the absolutely catastrophic consequences if a dam of that unprecedented scale were to actually fail. It sparked this massive global conversation and just intense scrutiny of the structure. But what were people actually looking at?
Well, as it turns out, you can breathe a sigh of relief. Those terrifying viral images were a complete false alarm. The dam wasn't buckling at all. What people were actually seeing was a massive optical illusion caused by software, specifically a Google Earth image stitching artifact. You see, when satellite mapping software pieces together different images, taken from slightly different angles or at different times, to create one giant continuous map, it can sometimes accidentally warp the final composite. It's kind of like a bad panoramic photo on your phone, but on a massive scale. So yeah, there was no actual structural deformation of the dam itself. It was literally just a glitch in the matrix.
Part 1. Democratizing Megastructure Oversight. Now, despite that whole 2020 incident being a total false alarm, it actually proved a really massive point. You no longer need government permission to watch the dam.
So the crucial point is, because oversight has been democratized almost overnight by satellite tech, we now have access to an incredible quality of data. On one hand, you've got Sentinel-2. That's the European Space Agency's Earth observation satellite. It passes over the Three Gorges Dam regularly and provides 10-meter resolution imagery that is completely free and open access. Literally anyone can download it. And on the other hand, you have commercial satellite operators like Maxar, Planet Labs, and Airbus. They offer even higher resolution imagery. We're talking down to an astonishing 30 centimeters. That is sharp enough to identify individual cars driving right across the crest of the dam.
And because of this incredible tech, an entirely new community of independent analysts, journalists, researchers, and even just concerned citizens can now monitor the dam super closely. And they're looking at really specific things. They track reservoir water levels just by watching the waterline changes on the imagery. They scan the hillsides for new landslide scars. They look for high-resolution structural changes. They can literally watch new reinforcement construction happening in real time, and they can even track exactly when and how much water is being released by observing the spillway discharge patterns. All of this completely independently gathered without relying on a single state disclosure.
Part 2. The limits of the lens. Now, as powerful as standard satellite photography is, we absolutely have to acknowledge its vulnerabilities.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clearly it lays out what we can see versus the very real internal dangers that we simply cannot. Standard optical imagery from space is incredible for surface-level observation, sure, but at the end of the day, it's ultimately just a camera lens. And cameras have huge limitations when assessing the true health of a giant concrete megastructure. We just talked about the optical capabilities, the surface water, the construction, the spillways, but look at those blind spots. A satellite camera cannot see internal concrete degradation. It can't tell you if the internal steel reinforcement is rusting away. It is totally blind to foundation seepage happening deep underground, and it definitely can't measure the internal pore pressure building up inside the dam. And misinterpreting these limits, like we saw with that warping illusion, can cause totally unnecessary panic. And worse, it allows authorities to just dismiss satellite monitoring altogether as unreliable.
Oh, and then there's the most obvious, deeply frustrating flaw of standard optical imagery. It is constantly blinded by something as simple as clouds. The Three Gorges region is notorious for heavy cloud cover, especially during the intense monsoon season. Just think about that for a second. The exact time of year when flood monitoring is absolutely the most critical, when water levels are peaking and the dam is under maximum pressure, is exactly when standard satellites are most likely to just see a giant, useless blanket of white fluff.
Part 3. Seeing the Invisible with SAR and INSAR. Let's look at the technological evolution that completely solves these optical blind spots.
Enter SAR, which stands for Synthetic Aperture Radar, and INSAR, or Interferometric SAR. The absolutely vital thing to understand here is that this is radar technology. It doesn't rely on cameras, it doesn't need sunlight, and it honestly doesn't care if there's a massive monsoon storm raging below. Radar penetrates right through the clouds. But it does way more than just see through the weather. It actually measures microscopic ground displacement by comparing how radar waves bounce back up to space over time.
Let's move to and see how this builds, step by step, because the mechanics here are just so cool. First, the satellite emits radar pulses down toward the Earth, slicing right through any cloud cover. Second, those radar signals hit the surface of the dam and bounce right back up into space. Third, and this is where the INSAR magic actually happens, analysts capture those returning waves. Over time, as the satellite passes over again and again, they compare the phases of those returning waves. If the structure has moved even a tiny microscopic bit between flyovers, the radar wave has to travel a very slightly different distance, which shifts the phase of the wave.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why INSAR is a total game changer. By comparing those tiny shifts in the radar wave phases, analysts can detect structural movement at millimeter precision. Millimeters. We aren't talking about goofy warping artifacts on a mapping app anymore. We're talking about objectively detecting the exact kind of microscopic, gradual structural movement that almost always precedes a catastrophic dam failure. In fact, research teams have already published INSAR analyses of the Three Gorges Reservoir area, proving for a fact that this technique works brilliantly.
Part 4. The future of transparency. Let's zoom out from those microscopic radar waves to the massive scale of the new satellite networks orbiting the Earth right now.
Because, you see, the technology isn't just getting sharper. The sheer volume of eyes in the sky is just exploding. 200. That is an enormous number. Planet Labs alone currently operates over 200 satellites. Why does that matter to us? Because one of the historic limits of satellite monitoring was temporal resolution. Basically, how often a specific satellite actually flies over the dam. If a satellite only passes by once a month, you've got a massive blind spot in time. But with constellations of over 200 satellites, those temporal gaps are rapidly shrinking to zero.
Because of these massive constellations, daily or even near-daily imagery of the dam site is now becoming entirely possible. We're moving toward a reality of continuous monitoring completely regardless of government cooperation. These independent networks provide objective, repeatable data that entirely circumvents the political barriers that historically prevented on-site inspections. You don't need to physically inspect a dam if you can continuously watch it from space, day and night, rain or shine.
Which brings us to the core thesis of today's explainer, brilliantly captured by this thought. The information asymmetry is closing, slowly, imperfectly, but irreversibly. You know, the Three Gorges Dam was built in a totally different era, an era where governments controlled absolutely all the information about their own infrastructure. Today, it operates in an era where the public can download 10-meter resolution images for free or analyze millimeter-precise radar data. The era of state-controlled infrastructure secrecy is permanently ending.
The power to observe and analyze these massive structures is now literally in the hands of anyone with an internet connection. The democratization of Earth observation is very real, and it's completely reshaping how we view global infrastructure. So my question to you is, are you going to look up the Three Gorges Dam on satellite imagery after watching this explainer? Go see for yourself what a 10-meter resolution image actually looks like. Drop your thoughts and whatever you find in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep your eyes on the skies.